at a certain level of athleticism, somebody is going to be twice as effective as you are during rolls. And like, that's a huge difference, right? If you're twice as effective as someone, it'll mean that you pretty much win every exchange.
Well, be it resolved that jiu-jitsu is magic and that all you need is good technique. Go.
Okay. Well, I will take the con position.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, isn't it? That there is this mythology that all you need to do is get better at technique. And certainly all the other attributes without technique, you have nothing. But it's a multiplier effect, right? If you have pretty good technique.
So let me like bounce back right away. All the other attributes without technique, you don't have nothing. If we go to an extreme enough level, let's just take the usual example here, which is the mountain from Game of Thrones.
Okay, fair enough.
Right there's a video that was put out recently by Coach Brian, and he gave an example of a 310-pound guy came into his gym and tapped a black belt in his first week just by like crushing him. So at a certain level, the attributes themselves are enough.
Okay. For most normal situations,
of course,
attributes plus skill, plus tactics, plus strategy.
Yeah.
But I'll grant you that, I mean, if you take the ridiculous example of, Bob Sapp, who used to fight in Pride at, I think, 375 pounds of
something ridiculous like
washboard muscle.
Yeah.
It's kind of difficult to overcome that just with your, white belt 4 stripes. And probably quite difficult to overcome that with your black belt 2 stripes. Well,
exactly. And so this is, it depends on, which white belt and which black belt. Mm-hmm. And so there's a kind of a Venn diagram or a triangle between like skill, and then you've got athleticism, and then you've got rank. And there's a huge spectrum of, points along the way that contribute to results. And the majority of people doing jiu-jitsu who train at hobbyist clubs and have never actually experienced what a high-level athlete who also happens to be a purple belt or a brown belt or a black belt looks like. Or if they have experienced it, it's been, briefly at a seminar, and they chalk 100% of that up to how good they are. If you've ever rolled with Rafa Mendez or, rolled with Lucas Lepre, and they're like, my God, he is just on a completely other level. There's black belts and then there's black belts. And they make that seem as though the entire gap there is a skill gap, not taking into account that Rafa Mendez is at the peak of an athletic endeavor as an athlete, also a guy who's just really fit, really strong, crazy gas tank, crazy flexibility, coordination, yada, yada, yada. If you separate his jiu-jitsu skill and timing, he's still a peak level athlete in the world. Mm-hmm. And you don't factor that into that's why Rafa Mendez kicked your local black belt's ass.
Yeah. I mean, if Rafa Mendez was a salsa dancer, he'd be a pretty amazing salsa dancer. If he played tennis, he'd probably be pretty good at tennis.
Yes.
So you said
that's kind of, I guess there's a misapprehension that is frankly fed by certain affiliations and certain parts of the jiu-jitsu community that that stuff, because it's not pure jiu-jitsu, doesn't really matter. And it creates a little bit of bad blood at some academies, for people who, haven't been promoted, and people who are, have an expectation of what it means to be a blue belt or a purple belt or whatever, and just don't factor in the athleticism and how much that influences the effectiveness of somebody when they're grappling.
I believe maybe what you're referring to is this tagline of jiu-jitsu is for everybody. So it doesn't matter if you're 60 years old, doesn't matter if you're 20 years old, doesn't matter if you were a star track athlete in high school, doesn't matter if you've just slipped off the couch and into the gym, you can do jiu-jitsu. And I mostly agree. I mean, obviously there's some ludicrous edge cases where, if you have osteoporosis, jiu-jitsu is not for you.
Yeah.
You will break, and it's going to do you way more harm than good. And there's other athletic activities or other activities.
Yeah, there are definitely like extreme examples, just, like with the mountain example. But for the most part, I would say, anybody with a normally functioning body outside of the extreme ends of like obesity or anorexia or, some wasting disease, anybody with a reasonably functioning body can do jiu-jitsu. But we also shouldn't pretend that everybody, this is a whole different topic, but not everybody should or can become a black belt. If we're going to have black belt mean skill, and even at the range of like, you can be a black belt skill-wise and a good one, like you can be a very skillful, knowledgeable black belt, and you'll roll with like a good blue or purple belt who happens to outweigh you by 50 pounds and be an incredible athlete. And that's just going to completely cancel out, if not turn the role in the favor of the lower ranked person.
Yeah. One of the first people I heard address this was actually Dan Inosanto, and this was maybe 20 years ago when, or maybe 15, when he was starting jiu-jitsu, and he pointed out that like, I might be a brown belt, but I'm 65, 70 years old. So if I go against an athletic purple belt or an athletic blue belt, I could have trouble. And it was just to see that humility of somebody who legitimately is very, very good for whatever his age was, 65 or 70 at the time. But just the awareness that you're just not going to be able to hang with some, 20-year-old cardio strength monster who's 20 years old and has a blue belt. Oh yeah,
and I mean that's just the sort of thing that should be pretty like obvious,
but it's not. It's not.
Like I'm getting ready to compete. I'm going to be doing American Nationals, and so I'm sort of in camp, whatever that looks like for me. And so my one of the rounds that I did recently, the parameters were that my opponent was basically like stalling in the top position. Like they I need to score to win, and they just need to keep me from scoring. Those were the parameters. And my training partner was a 240, 250 pound former professional rugby player who's a blue belt and like not a great blue belt, right? Like if we go like purely by skill level and knowledge, a guy who, if we eliminate his athleticism, is not, he's not knocking on the door of purple. Let's put it that way. He's got a lot to learn still, but he was sweaty as fuck. And I couldn't, like, this is no-gi, I couldn't keep a grip. He would just pull away and turn and run. And like I did in a 6-minute round, I finally got a sweep on him in the last 30 seconds and managed to hold him down with everything I had to just keep him down for those 30 seconds. And up until then, I couldn't do shit to him. I was not effective. And I'm a guy who's been doing this for 20 years, and I'm not like a total hobbyist black belt who doesn't keep up with, current developments. I try to roll and train as much as possible with adult division black belts. And in training, I'm, relatively, decent at hanging with them. So like, I'm not the example of the broken down, twice a week hobbyist. I'm a decent black belt, and I had hell of a time scoring on, just a very athletic blue belt within certain parameters. So this to me is just obvious shit, and something I really try to communicate to my students. But despite that, there's still the like, why isn't that guy a higher belt because he's beating me up kind of complaint.
Well, you talked about that, not trifecta, but that triangle of skill, athleticism, and rank. Can you just go into each one of those just so that we're totally clear? I mean, rank is pretty obvious. White belt, blue belt, unfortunately, white rash guard, blue rash guard, purple rash guard.
There's no standard for rank. So rank is just whatever you've been given. You're either white belt, you're a blue belt, purple belt, brown belt, black belt. In terms of athleticism, I would say most of the people doing jiu-jitsu are not particularly athletic, unless you're training at a world level competition type school. Most of the people doing jiu-jitsu have a very limited level of athleticism, if any. Like, again, depending on how obnoxiously you want to define athleticism, I'd say most of the people are unathletic that are doing jiu-jitsu. And I would include myself in that. I'm not particularly athletic at all.
How would you define athleticism? Are there some sort of numerical parameters around that? I don't know, 40-yard dash time. I mean,
Well, yeah,
the NFL's
exactly.
got the combine.
That's basically what I would use is some sort of standard, whether it's the NFL combine or, 100-meter sprint or like whatever. Obviously, there are these are going to be relative to different sports, but like, what's your vertical jump? What's your like stuff like that? How explosive are you? And then, we've got other athletic parameters. Like some people just have insane like lactate threshold and just like cardiovascular recovery. So that's another element. I mean, all those things can be trained. But, you just kind of have like a baseline of somebody who walks through the door who isn't particularly like trained as an athlete, but what is their baseline level of athleticism without adding on top of that, maybe they ran track in high school or maybe they played rugby or whatever, because that's a confounding factor. But I'd say most people who are doing jiu-jitsu are not overly athletic.
Okay.
And then we've got skill. Right. So skill is just purely, without the burden of a massive size difference, without the burden of exhaustion or whatever. Like if I'm just fresh and we're kind of, roughly the same size, what can I actually execute? When we take, a lot of the athleticism out of the equation and just if we're both kind of moving at about the same pace, what do I know that I can do to somebody who also knows you like not a dummy, not drilling, but like against another opponent, as much as we can control for those other factors, what can I actually put into play versus knowledge? So I would separate skill from knowledge because I can certainly know a bunch of stuff and not be able to practically apply it with my body against somebody who's also fairly skillful.
Yeah, there's a lot of, theoretical knowledge out there that maybe it was useful for a teacher, but if you can't apply it in a role against a difficult opponent, then it's not skill.
Exactly.
Okay. So what then is we've talked about this before, but the division between skill development and athletic development. And I guess there's also rank development, right? But you see that in reverse. You see people sandbagging. No, we're not going to promote you to brown belt because we want you to keep on destroying everybody at blue belt. So rank is one variable that can be affected, mostly in collusion with your teacher, and usually it's affected downwards.
Yes.
To allow you to dominate a certain division and make the teacher feel really good about their skills, their teaching skills. So ignoring that, the division between athleticism and skill, how do you allocate time there? How are you allocating time given that you're getting ready?
So I'm allocating it probably about 70-30 in favor of skill versus athleticism. But I compete in the master's division, so I can do that, right? Like I guess when I discuss this with students, what I try to convey to them is it really just comes down to what are your goals? Like, what do you want to get out of this? And depending on what you want to get out of it, you can put zero time into developing your athleticism. If you are just absolutely a hobbyist, you have no interest in competing, you just want to come to the club and just learn some jiu-jitsu, just do that. That's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with it. You will be limited to a certain degree by your physical state, right? Like if you don't do a certain amount of cardio, if you don't do a certain amount of strength training, there's only so much you can get from doing jiu-jitsu, especially if you're only going to do it a couple times a week. But there's nothing wrong. I would say the majority of the people who train at my club, that's what they do. They come to jiu-jitsu a couple, 2-3 times a week, and they don't do anything else.
And there are some ancillary benefits of training jiu-jitsu. You will become somewhat stronger than you would if you didn't, and you'd become somewhat better endurance.
But there's a point where that stops, which is, when you're one of the top, let's say 5 or 10% within your academy, you're no longer getting fitter from rolling unless you do the competition training or unless you come in and roll only with guys at your level. If you're a purple belt, or a brown belt, for the most part, you can coast in rolls. So you stop getting stronger and you stop getting fitter.
And I would argue
I've seen people actually get less fit. Like once they get to a certain point, they're good enough that they actually get into worse shape because they're so good at jiu-jitsu.
Well, when we were filming BJJ for old fucks or farts or folks, BJJ for old folks, you mentioned the second volume, the guard passing volume. You mentioned that you'd gotten a false positive signal on how good your conditioning was. because you had basically been developing a new kind of guard passing and just been sandbagging while passing and thought that you were in super shape.
Oh yeah, huge false positive. I just thought that, man, I can do round after round of this. And it was just how I was doing my passing that wasn't reliant on explosive movement or even much movement at all. So yeah, like that's a great example of how once you get pretty good, if you have a like lazy half guard that you play and that you can just hold on to people and then sweep them and then play pressure passing from there, you can do round after round after round with almost no demand on your cardiovascular system. That's totally doable.
I would argue that if you're using jiu-jitsu to develop, say, your cardio or using jiu-jitsu to develop your strength, once you get past a certain level, the risk to reward ratio changes. Like if I'm just going balls to the wall, training as hard as I can against fresh people who are my level as often as I can, my endurance will improve, but the odds of getting injured during those rounds as I get tired decreases. So there's actually a pretty good argument to, mostly training skill on the mats and mostly pushing into the red zone on, say, a Tabata bike. Of course, once in a while, you've got to go into that zone on the mats, but it's way safer if you can separate those two a little bit.
100%. And that's what I do. So when I say like I'm 70-30, I do Tabatas on the Airdyne, once a week. I do rounds of Tabatas once a week, and I do sprints once a week on the Airdyne, or I'll do stair runs. I do chin ups and that kind of like I'll do 3 or 4 conditioning sessions a week, and I'll do let's say 6 jiu-jitsu sessions a week. Yeah.
I mean, we've talked before about how Marcelo Garcia was kind of the one exception back in the day of a jiu-jitsu guy who didn't do much conditioning, although the warm-ups for his class were legendarily
and not
tough.
only that, he had a way of doing rounds that was conditioning. There's actually a video out there. It's on YouTube, but it's from MG in Action, where he talks about the 3 different sort of modes of training. And there's just multiple rounds that you can watch on the site where you can see that he is just like, he's going up against a blue belt that he can beat. And so he's just trying to like hit as many guard passes as possible in a minute on that blue belt. That's his conditioning.
Yeah. And fairly safe.
Yeah,
because he's not doing it on a white belt. If he did that on a white belt,
exactly,
he'd get kneed in the face, and then his jaw would get dislocated, and they'd break his elbow somehow.
Well, yeah, and that's something that I talk to my students about quite a bit. Is when we do our safety briefings and have them sign our safety policy, it's just like the more skilled you are, the harder you can go safely, and that's another thing when it comes to like how am I developing my skill level versus my athleticism versus my rank. It's just like once I get fairly skillful, I can actually roll pretty hard. Not so hard that I'm pushing my peak conditioning, which, like you say, like for peak conditioning, for me, it's Airdyne or it's stairs. Those are the only ways. Because if I go to that limit during rolling, then I am risking injury, even with other skillful people, because I'm so close to the point of fatigue that I will do something stupid and they may not be able to protect me under those circumstances. In an 80% roll with Rory, I protect him, he protects me. It's kind of like wearing a mask. Like we protect each other. But once we get to that like really peak level of trying to like push through conditioning, that stops being valid. So I would much rather do that on the bike.
So at the Worlds, which just happened, who are you impressed with athletically and who are you impressed with skill-wise? And can you separate those two a little bit, or was it just so conjoined?
That's so hard. So like I always like I would need to rewatch, because I do this. I rewatch matches and I try to break down, why did that happen? Was it because the other guy was tired, or was it because there was just such a delta in skill between the two? And that's like, yeah. I mean, I try to do it. I don't know if I do it accurately. I like to think so. But man, just watching a match once, other than really extreme examples when you can see somebody just takes a break and the other dude passes their guard, I'd say that's a really difficult thing, because you can't feel strength. through the television, right?
Yeah.
Like obviously somebody can seem very strong. You can't feel pressure through the television. You can see when you think somebody just wilted under the pressure, but you can definitely see when somebody just has a really skillful set of movements that they connect and they get on the, like they force the turtle and they get on the back and they get the choke. So they're like, Tynan Dalpra impressed me quite a bit. Especially with his passing, and then the back takes, unbelievably. I think Fionn Davies really impressed me with her skill level. Marigali, I think, is incredibly skillful versus just being like super jacked and super strong. I'd say those are probably the people that stood out.
Yeah, I didn't watch all of it, but it did seem that guard passing was making a bit of a resurgence, which is
and
nice
that's true
see.
in nogi as well. Yeah.
There's that statistic that shows, like the percentage of points that are scored from guard sweeps versus guard passes versus knee on the belly versus taking the back versus mount. And it's overwhelmingly skewed towards points from guard sweeps. But I think that's a little bit of a false positive there as well, because if you and I are rolling and you sweep me, and then I sweep you, and then you sweep me. Oh, look, in this match, there was a grand total of, 20 points scored with guard sweeps. But if you sweep me, and then you pass my guard, and you get knee on the belly, and you go to mount, and you choke me, that's the end of the match. So there's only a limited number of points. Many matches end when somebody takes somebody's back.
Yeah.
So I think that just numerically, that statistic, it's informative and we should be aware of it, but it's important to not get too misled by that.
Well, and I do, but I also think it's the, I don't want to say the easiest thing to do because it's not easy, but of the things that you're trying to do to an elite level black belt, getting a sweep on them, I'd say, is the easiest.
Sure.
Yeah.
As opposed to, choking them out from the back.
Or passing their guard.
Yeah. Why do you think the guard passing is making a bit of a resurgence? Is it just the cycle of things, the rabbit and
I think so. I think we're in a development phase where guard passing has changed, and I think some of the guard play hasn't caught up yet.
What specifically has changed?
Well,
the Rotolo brothers are doing all kinds of crazy guard passes. I don't know how much of that will go mainstream.
Yeah, I mean, in nogi, certainly the body lock stuff is quite prevalent. I think like the tripod passing stuff is also becoming quite prevalent, quite effective. I'd say the combination of movement into pressure is much more refined than it used to be. There's some like innovative like cross step type stuff that I'd say the Mendez brothers used to, or specifically Rafa Mendez used to be the only one who would cross step, and now you're seeing other people employ it. Some of the cross grip or the same side grip stuff that the Dalpra does, in particular, where he's gripping underneath of the triceps or the shoulder at the gi to rotate the other person away. I'd say that stuff is really powerful. There's some Marigali does a grip with the leg drag where he grabs by the side of the body in the gi, which I think is fairly new. So I think there have been some innovations. There are ways of tying people up with the lapels, kind of like almost worm guard-ish stuff that people can affect to generate guard passes.
Worm guard from the top?
Yeah. Yeah, because like a little while ago, and we're talking really a little while ago, probably like 7-8 years ago now, there was a big revolution in guard passing, I'd say mostly by Leandro Lowe, where he was doing the floating style of passing, where he would allow an off balance and then just use a collar grip to cross face the other person and turn them away. And he completely changed guard passing. I remember when I learned that stuff for a little while, it was so effective that it was boring for me when facing De La Riva players, where I would just be able to pass them like so easily in training that I just stopped doing it for a little while. And so I think probably there's a similar meta shift is going on, where there are a couple of guys who are just really good at a few things, and it's going to just take a little while for it to catch up. The same way that when Keenan started doing worm guard, people just had no answers for it. And then, Leandro Lo and Buchecha both managed to pass his worm guard, and that stopped being the same sort of thing where it was just, if you ended up in worm guard, there was nothing you could do. I just think we're in a little bit of that cycle right now with some passes.
Yeah. So let's take it back to this triangle between skill, rank, and athleticism. Mm-hmm. What do you tell your students? Like, Rob, why is that guy's beating me up consistently, and he's only a blue belt, and I'm a purple belt? Why isn't he a purple belt? Or alternately, I'm beating up all the white belts. Why aren't I a blue belt yet?
Well, I basically tell them that there is a triangle there, and it's really just numbers, right? Like at a certain level of athleticism, somebody is going to be twice as effective as you are during rolls. And like, that's a huge difference, right? If you're twice as effective as someone, it'll mean that you pretty much win every exchange, right? And like, part of the issue is that, again, because I have a hobbyist club and I don't have a ton of people that compete where we have like a competition team where everybody just kind of like, at some gyms, when you look at the competition team guys, no one's upset that the competition team blue belt is beating up the purple belts and the brown belts that are just hobbyists. But because we don't have so much of a like defined competition team, like there are guys who, again, getting ready for this tournament right now, we've got a blue belt who's going to go and compete. And people are like, they're asking him like, hey man, you must be having pretty competitive rolls with Rob at this point, because he kicks their ass and I kick their ass.
Right.
And I have to explain to them that like when he kicks your ass, it's because he's rolling pretty intensely. When I kick your ass, I'm going at 20% and I'm barely trying. So you can't do that math. And then when I have a roll with him where I have battles where he's at his best and I'm letting him play, it's quite competitive, which is true. So like they might watch a roll between us that is competitive, and then they extrapolate outwards like, well, why the fuck isn't he a purple belt? Well, because if we have another roll where I just don't let him get to his strongest positions and I just get to mine right away, I crush him. Yeah. And people don't understand that. They don't see, like, again, because people don't compete, because people don't understand that training is training. It's like I always use that Allen Iverson meme, like, we're talking about practice. We're talking about practice. Like, you don't understand how little I'm trying in practice against a white belt, against a blue belt, against a purple belt. I am never going at even 80%, let alone 100%. I'm almost never going 50% with pretty much every colored belt other than my best purple belts in training, because I'm practicing, I'm developing stuff, and I'm their teacher, and I want them to develop certain skills. So I'm
And if you just crush them and never let them into the game, what are you going to learn?
What are they going to learn?
Sure.
Right? So there's no benefit.
Since when does an instructor care about their students' skill development? This is all about ego, right, man.
So because I'm rolling with them as an instructor partially and as a developing grappler partially, there's a lot that I'm allowing to happen in every roll. And because I don't make the point of explaining that every single time, a lot gets lost in translation when two people roll. People just think, oh, you rolling hard, like every roll is equal. They don't understand that there are development rolls and there are blah, 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 blah. So, I do explain it. I explain it in our safety briefings. I explain to people during promotion ceremonies, like, hey, just so you know, if you're wondering why so-and-so didn't get promoted, well, it's because he's 3 times the athlete that everyone that got promoted is. And I'm promoting you on skill purely, which means that if part of the reason you're so effective in your roles is that you're just a really dominant, explosive athlete, then I'm factoring that into your promotion, and you might not get your purple belt until I'm damn certain that you're pulling stuff off because of your skill. And if you happen to compete, that's one way that I can tell. If you're going out and you're competing at blue belt and you didn't win your last tournament at blue belt, then why the fuck am I putting you up to purple belt? Like, that just doesn't make any sense. But, and again, people have that ego protection where they want to have it so that no blue belt can beat them if they're a purple belt. Frankly, that's just not my concern. If you have that fragile an ego, then deal with it. I'm not your nursemaid.
Just to go back to that point about you letting people into your game, or maybe that you're working on something new. You're working on, I don't know, inside out, left-sided, reverse Della spider guard or some crazy thing. You're doing that. You're accepting that you're not maybe going to be a black belt at that. You're going to be, I don't know, purple belt level at that crazy new guard or something. A friend of mine just had this experience. He was, for the last 5 or 10 years, he's just been traveling around and training at different clubs, not really taking the classes, just sparring. And he's got a very good A game, very good half guard game, back take, and a couple of chokes from there. It's very difficult to submit. But his game hasn't changed or evolved at all. So now he's finally started training again with another one of my friends and learning. And his skill on the mat has actually gone down because he's trying the new stuff and he's getting murdered and he's out of his comfort zone. So I would still call him a very, very good black belt. But right now he's rolling more like a purple belt or brown belt because he's in that development phase again. That's another thing that people don't recognize, that his effective rank has gone down because he's working on an area where his skill legitimately isn't as good yet.
Yeah, exactly. That's why it's so important to recognize that this is practice and you don't know what somebody is doing, right? Like every roll, like unless I sit down before the roll and go, okay, Mr. White Belt, just FYI, in this roll, I'm setting my level at 10% and I'm working on this type of guard passing. And I'm never going to submit you. If I pass your guard, I'm going to go back and do it again 10 times. Or I'm working on passing directly to mount, and I'm going to finish with the arm bar every single time. And now that you know that, we can proceed, right? Like I'm not going to do that every time. If it's the first scenario,
they come away with the lesson like, man, he passed my guard, but I managed to re-guard Rob 10 times.
Exactly. That's exactly it, right?
So, okay. So then in a class setting, given that you don't have, given that, let's assume that most clubs, I think it's fair to say that most clubs don't have a competition team. Do you think that's fair? They might have competition classes.
If by most you mean like more than 50%, I'd say, yeah, probably most clubs. Yeah.
So since we've been talking about competition training versus just regular hobbyist training, what's different about competition training? I mean, one obvious example that I see a lot of is all of a sudden people start keeping track of points, because there's a lot of ways that people train. They just roll to have fun, flow with the go kind of thing. But they're losing points, and they're losing points, and they're losing advantages, and they're going to lose matches if that's the way they train. So that's one obvious way. Yeah, so
there's a few things, right? Like for one, the sparring is a lot harder, right? Like every round is a round that is trying to simulate the intensity of competition. So you fight for everything. That's the first thing. And anyone can participate in competition training, like as long as you're just ready to suffer. Right? Like if you don't have the necessary conditioning, just know that you might, like if you think the hot shot purple belt submits you a lot in regular class, come to competition training, right? It's just going to be a whole new world. So that's fine. As long as you're just open to that, you can participate. But then the flip side is the expectation is that you put up a fight. Don't just fall over because they're trying a sweep that they're probably going to get. Like, fight them till the end as long as you're not risking injury. Try not to get swept. If you get swept, try to pop back up. Don't do the same like sort of passive shit that you normally do, where you just fall over because the other person growls at you. Right. So that's the main difference, I'd say, is just like be prepared for really like fighting tooth and nail for every inch of ground. And then the other major thing is you're trying to keep track of points. And a lot of the times the way that the training is going to go is it's first to score. So rather than doing a full round with any one person, there's king of the hill type stuff where one person stays in, and if there's a score, then the person that got scored on goes out. and then the next person comes in, and there's just different ways of doing that. And then there will be very specific scenarios. So, like in our competition prep, it's like, okay, this round we're starting standing passer against seated guard. Next round, it's standing passer against recumbent guard. Next round, it's kneeling passer against that sort of thing. Next round, you're caught in the half guard. The person on bottom is up points on you, and they're just trying to stall. They don't need to attack you at all. You have to pass their guard to win, and vice versa. You're on bottom in half guard. The other person doesn't have to pass because they're up on points. They can stall. You must sweep them to where, like, basically you try to pick every scenario that's likely to occur where you've got a window of time where you need to get a result. And then you try to do that with multiple people so that you're tired and they're not.
What's the 80-20 analysis on those stalling kind of scenarios? I mean, I've lost a judo competition for that exact scenario. Like I was winning, I got caught in the half guard, and the guy just held on long enough, and and of course in judo the timeline is so much shorter than in jiu-jitsu. Yeah. So
I would say that the stuck in half guard is probably one of the primary ones. And then just from the flip side is the guard retention against a blitz. If there's 30 seconds left, it's an open guard scenario. The other guy's just fitter than you, and he's going to be able to bring it for the entire 30 seconds. Can you last and not give up an advantage at that point? Because that, it's a 0-0 score. They're going to bring it. I'd say those are probably the two scenarios, and vice versa. Can you score the advantage when there's 30 seconds left, when you just need to dig deep and just keep going and try to get past the guy's guard? I'd say those are the best bang for buck 80-20 type things.
So that blitz passing versus blitz passing guard retention is obviously both people going as hard as they can.
Yes.
The guy on top and the guy on bottom.
Yeah.
But in the other scenario, the guy in half guard is trying to hold on to half guard as hard as he can, but he's not trying to advance the position. He's not trying to sweep. He's not trying to submit.
Yeah. And vice versa. The guy on top is pretending like he's trying to pass the guard just so he doesn't get called for stalling. And the guy on bottom has to generate a sweep. I'd say those four scenarios are the ones where if you put time into that, you're going to have that final minute of the match where you need to create something. And also the battle for takedowns. There's a minute left. We're standing. You need to score with a takedown.
Yeah. There are takedowns in jiu-jitsu? I had no idea. What do you think if you're trying to get into competition and you, for some perverted reason, want to start playing takedowns and risk all that injury that comes with it, then what are the most effective takedowns to start training? I mean, I'm still a big fan of, and this is old school, but the various sacrifice throws, if you can sneak them in at all. I mean, but it's harder against the typical jiu-jitsu posture.
This wasn't you feeding me an easy plug, but hand fighting.
Yeah.
If it's not so much training a specific takedown as it is spend the majority of your time getting really good at hand fighting and an entry into an exchange, and then whatever that entry goes into, have 2 or 3 options off of that, and then you're golden.
Okay. So talk me through it. Give me an example. I mean, we'll assume that
hand fighting to a single leg and then running the pipe or switching off to a double or switching off to a high leg, a rear body lock type thing. Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything else that people should be doing in their competition training?
Oh, I mean, the scenario work is probably endless. No matter what list I come up with, I would leave something off of it. But you basically, you prepare for what you think is going to happen.
What about the working on your strengths versus shoring up your weaknesses? I mean, there's only a limited number of hours.
I don't think you do that in the camp for a tournament. I think that is the time to just make sure that you are going to be able to execute whatever the things that you're going to do as well as possible under short time and under exhaustion. I think that's the purpose of a camp. I think that you shore up your weaknesses outside of that. I don't think you learn new stuff really that much when you're getting ready to compete.
No, that's fair. That's fair. What about the length of a camp? I mean, I've certainly done training camps for various athletic competitions, and I've done certainly too long. Like, I've worn myself down so that I underperformed on competition day. And in general, the shorter the camp for me, the better. But I was pretty active anyway, so I was.
Well, yeah, so, I mean, I am just way not qualified to answer that from like whatever the latest sports science is. The last stuff that I looked at, I would say 4 to 5 weeks that's what I'm, so I'll answer what I'm
works
currently,
well for you.
Yeah. What I'm currently following is a camp of about 5 weeks. And what I try to do given the time is I do a conditioning camp prior to the actual tournament camp. So that's what I did for Nogi Worlds last time out. And that's the best I've felt in any tournament. There was no match where I felt that tired or like so tired that I couldn't execute. And there were matches where I was not tired at all. Like, I could have just done another match immediately after that match ended. But that camp was probably about a 4 weeks of just getting in shape to get ready for a camp. And then a camp of probably close to 6 weeks of just doing conditioning. And then about 2 weeks of jiu-jitsu because I was injured. I had a torn rotator cuff. I couldn't do jiu-jitsu. So I just went nuts on the conditioning and then only did about 2 weeks of jiu-jitsu. And my jiu-jitsu felt fine. Like you'll get to a certain point where unless you're, trying to win adult worlds, your jiu-jitsu is just going to be good enough. And it's just going to be, are you in good enough shape to show up and execute on the day?
What were you doing for those? What were you doing for the 4-week pre-conditioning camp workouts? And what were you doing for these 6-week conditioning camp workouts?
It was the same stuff, just ramped up. So I would start with...
how many times a week?
4 times a week.
Okay.
Of Tabatas on the Airdyne, rounds on the Airdyne, and sprints on the Airdyne, mixed in with stair runs and the Versa Climber.
So what was a typical... Like Tabatas are the 20 seconds on, 10 seconds off.
Yeah, so there's the like max effort Tabata where you just do one for 4 minutes. Yeah. And so I would do that once a week. And then I would do multiple rounds of 6 minutes. Okay. So in the first week, I would do 2 rounds. And the next week I would do 3 rounds. And the next week I would do 4 rounds. And the next week I would do 5 rounds. So like when I get to 5 rounds, I think for the final week I did 6 for Nogi Worlds. Because I was anticipating 3 to 4 matches in my weight class and 3 to 4 matches in the absolute.
And how much time between those rounds?
5 minutes rest, because that's the amount of time that you're guaranteed under IBJJF rules. Okay, you will definitely get 5 minutes between matches, although usually you get more.
Did you ever throw up?
No.
No. Okay.
No, I was close a couple times.
Eating before Tabatas was the most recent time I've thrown up during a workout was eating something and then going to Tabatas.
That's basically why I don't throw up, is because I do my conditioning first thing with it. I don't have breakfast. I just go out and I do my most miserable conditioning. And then I would do sprints where it was 30-second full out sprint and then 5-6 minutes rest, like try to fully recover and do as many of those as I can until I see a decrease in my sprint ability, and then I stop.
Right.
And then there'd be some strength training, some deadlifts or some chin-ups and push-ups or single leg squats, stuff like that.
Okay. Yeah. And then when you moved into the actual 2-week training camp, you just left all that behind?
No, I would do 1 or 2 of those a week.
Like
usually
just to remind your body.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, that's I think a pretty good training camp. It's probably how I would try and structure something now. Again, trying to really push yourself in a way that you don't get injured before the camp, and then try and limit that window of injury potential, because right before a tournament, you've got no time to recover. I mean, if you jack your wrist, it's done.
Yeah, exactly. And like to sort of bring it back to the athleticism versus skill versus rank sort of delta. When I'm like, partway through a camp, and I'm in like pretty good, when I say good shape for a guy in his 40s who competes in the Masters division, which is nowhere near being in good shape for like, 80cc or any of these like adult division type athletes.
Well, you need more acai and Jesus for that.
Well, exactly. It's way more. So, I'm in like decent shape, but, by, elite grappler standards, I'm probably still in pretty crappy shape. Yeah. But just like when I'm in good shape for me, when that athleticism aspect changes, I do rounds with people where I'm like, normally I would not be able to do this to you. Yeah. Whether it's my students or whether it's some, training partners, local black belts, people that I roll with, like even though my skill level hasn't dramatically changed, if it barely changed, my effectiveness is exponentially greater, right? Like black belts that I have competitive rolls with, I will all of a sudden be able to tap 3 or 4 times per round. And so if you watched us training, and it bugs me when people, because my students ask me this, because, we'll have black belts visit us, and I'll get the better of them in a roll. And then a student will go like, hey, Rob, like, is that guy really a black belt? And I'm the first guy to shit on people who I don't think should be black belts. So like, if I'm a little like pissed at a question like that, then you're definitely, asking kind of an asshole question. It's like, dude, do you not get the difference between a guy who's in like the peak of condition getting ready for a tournament and like another like hobbyist black belt who's not in camp and is like smaller and like blah, blah, blah. Like, of course I'm going to tap them a few times per round. That doesn't make them not a black belt. That's a horseshit thing to ask. Like, it's like, again, like if, Kayotera comes over and taps me during a roll, it's like, man, Rob, should you not be a black belt? Like, that's a really bullshit thing to put in your mind, because there's so, again, it's those different variables, right?
Yeah. I've long been an advocate for doing cardio just as part of life. And part of it is that obviously it makes you more effective when you compete, or if God help you, if you have to fight for your life, but it also makes you more effective during class because you're not as tired, so you can retain information better. I mean, tell you what, I'll give you 10 random numbers and you try and memorize as many as you can, then sprint around a 400-meter track, and I'll give you another 10 random numbers as soon as you finish. See how many you remember. You're going to remember a lot more when you're not tired. So if you can be not tired in class, and if you can be not tired when you're rolling, you'll just get so much more out of those, just even out of the teaching, let alone the learning during the rolling. So I think that,
which is why the hard warm up before teaching technique is such an idiotic way of running a class.
Yeah. Back when I did Kachikembo with Philip Gelina in Montreal, we'd have a light warm up, we'd have a hard class, and then he did all the conditioning right at the end of class. That's when we did the push-ups, the jumping jacks, the burpees, all that. And that was actually, given that most of your students probably aren't going to do conditioning, and given that he thought the conditioning was important, I thought that was a pretty good workaround. It of course depends on what students want to get out of it. But if you want your students to be in shape, maybe save the hard conditioning for the end. But that doesn't really jive with the jiu-jitsu lifestyle of like, okay, now we do some rounds. And then some guys hang out forever, and then they do more rounds. They just keep rolling and bullshitting. So you would lose some of the jiu-jitsu lifestyle if you did it that way.
Exactly. And I mean, I'm not running a competition club. I'm not running a boot camp. It's got to be fun. So for me, that calculation is very different.
Rob's boot camp formula coming soon. Okay, man. Well, it was a great conversation as always. Good luck with your training.
Thank you.
And how long do you have?
I'm about 10 days out.
Okay. Yeah. Are you doing any tapering? What's your tapering schedule?
So this week is my hardest week. So I just did, like, yesterday was probably my hardest day. I've got 2 more hard competition training sessions left, tonight and Friday, and then match simulation on Saturday, and then we'll start to taper. So we'll starting Monday. So I compete a week from Saturday. That final week, I'll do probably just 1 or 2 steady state cardio workouts and 1 or 2 light drilling game plan like type sessions of jiu-jitsu, nothing else.
Awesome. Well, best of luck, and talk again soon.
Thank you.